Hi, welcome to another episode of Meet the Author. Today we have as our guest Nick Hahn, and he wrote the book Under the Skin. Nick started writing while a student at the University of Notre Dame. His travel diaries reflect 14 years of working among indigenous peoples from Africa to Latin America, where he witnessed social and political unrest. He makes his home in rural eastern Connecticut, near Long Island Sound, where he writes and narrates audiobooks. Under the Skin is his first novel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. It's nice to be here.
Well, I'm very interested in the part that you do audiobooks, and I'm very interested in the part Under the Skin. What do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about the book first, Under the Skin.
Okay. Now, one thing about Nick, he lived abroad. As you know, I had lived abroad and had been to 18 different countries. So it's very interesting for me to have Nick on the show and hear about his experiences living outside the States. Tell us what you were doing abroad, what type of business you had, and how you came about writing Under the Skin, which is taking place in Uganda, correct?
That's correct. Well, I have a small consulting company that specializes in economic development work in the developing world, the third world. Most of my work is done under government foreign aid programs like USAID, doing that work has taken me to a lot of very interesting countries over the last 15 years, including several in Africa, Eastern Europe, a lot of the former Soviet republics. I've spent time in South Asia and Latin America. And so when living and working in these countries, you get a whole different perspective than you do as a tourist, for example. And when you're living in a country for anywhere from 3 months to a year, you really get close to the local people. You live with them, you socialize with them, you work with them, and you really eventually they gain a trust in you, and you begin to understand their thinking and what's behind the scene. It's like who's pulling the levers behind the curtain. And so it was that experience in Uganda which developed the source material for this book. And I met people there that were very, very disillusioned by the government history of that country. There's a serious lack of human rights, especially women's rights. That has been there for many, many centuries. It's very interesting. It's not because of a brutal dictator necessarily. It's a cultural thing, and like in many Muslim countries, like in Pakistan, for example, or India, for example.
Well, according to them, the woman is the property of the man.
That's correct. I mean, it's like chattel and yet the women are born to accept this. They're growing up with this, and they accept it. It's just the way it is as far as they're concerned. That's quite different than somebody sort of forcing this down. But what's happening today with the young women in those countries, fortunately, like Malala from Pakistan, she's a very good example. They're standing up for themselves, and I saw some of that going on in East Africa, in Uganda, and Kenya, but this book takes place in Uganda.
Do they have the internet in these countries? I know in Egypt they had Facebook.
They definitely do.
So now they have a better knowledge of what's going on around the world.
They certainly do, and that's things like Facebook and so forth are changing the world, as we know. Mm-hmm. And even though some people have some problems with some of these social media networks, I think in the long run it's doing more good than harm. And in the case of human rights, I think is a very good example. And these young people are seeing the way others live in the developed world, and they're bringing about change in these countries. And that's really what this book is about. It's fiction, but the characters and the places and the scenes are based upon reality that I experienced when I lived there.
So you're using fiction and a novel to get your story across, to get your message across.
That is correct.
Is that your first novel?
It is my first novel. It is.
Would you have considered yourself an author before you wrote the novel, or this made you the author?
No, I did.
Because now you're in the author business.
I wouldn't have considered myself. No, I would have to go back and tell you that when I was a student at the University of Notre Dame, I was an English major, and for a long time I was convinced that I was going to be a writer. And that was going to be my life's work. And I went to college in the era of the great American writers, the Hemingways and Steinbecks and Fitzgeralds and so forth. And Hemingway in particular was one of my heroes. And, as a 20-year-old kid, you read about how this guy Hemingway lived. He was writing best-selling novels. He was he loved bullfighting and foreign war correspondence, and he was a deep-sea fisherman and a two-fisted drinker and a womanizer. I said, hey, this isn't a bad way to go. So I thought that would make a nice career, that I would write and be another Ernest Hemingway. Well, of course, I met the girl of my dreams when I was in my junior year of college, and all of that changed. I decided I have to go out and earn a living. So,
but you came full circle, because now you're working with the authoring again.
I put the writing in the back burner for many, many years, and had a long business career in New York. And now I'm able to, since I got into this consulting business the last 15 years, I've had the time to kind of think about writing again, and now I've never been happier doing this.
So read a chapter now, because you do specialize in audiobooks. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
But in your best voice, read a chapter from your own book, which I understand does not have an audio book yet.
No, but it's going to have.
Are you going to do it, or somebody else?
Well, that's an interesting question. The producer-director guys in the audiobook business would advise against the author reading their own books, although some do. So I might have other narrators audition for this book. I haven't really decided yet, but we'll see.
Or do you do woman's voice?
Well, that's a good question. I mean,
because
most books have both.
Right.
I narrate women's romance novels.
You do?
I do. And most of them are done by women. I do, and I'm able to do both
the protagonist,
both genders, and
you can do both genders.
Works out pretty well.
Well, let's hear then.
So this is chapter 5. I'm going to read the first page of chapter 5 of my book, and it is the beginning of a scene where the protagonist, the chief character, whose name is Nubalungi Kibugu. They call her Nabi. Nabi is 11 years old, and she's living in a small village in northern Uganda close to the Sudanese border. And in that part of Uganda, for many, many years now, there's been a notorious warlord by the name of Joseph Kony, who is still alive and well and operating in those jungles up there, which is kind of amazing, but it's true. And he's the guy who captures these children, turns the young boys into soldiers and the girls into sex slaves, and this has been going on for a long time. Well, she's living in this small village near the border where this guy was active. So this scene is the beginning of a scene where she actually gets captured and raped by these soldiers in northern Uganda by this fellow Joseph Kony. So it's summer 1989 in a village called Lira, which is an actual town in northern Uganda. And the point of view is from Nabi. I was at the river's edge of a small tributary of the Victoria Nile, a section of that thunderous body of water that slices north 4,000 miles through the jungle from Lake Victoria to Cairo. As usual, I had awakened early to the sounds of egrets and herons on the river. The family pet, a gray-crowned crane, strutted outside our home. A dirt hut made of thick mud bricks with a smoke hole on top and heavy straw matting on the floor. I was born on that mat 11 years ago, and the hut was the only home I'd ever known. As humble as it was, I felt safe and secure there, with my mother and father and my younger brother, Erastus. Quietly, I left the hut to savor a few moments before the family woke, and Erastus began kicking that deflated soccer ball around, disturbing the neighbors and bringing the whole village out of its slumber. The air was warm and humid, with the ever-present smell of raw sewage, despite the river current. As I walked to the river's edge, enjoying the peace and quiet of that beautiful morning, a shot rang out. I straightened and turned to see the truck entering the village. It was an old Toyota pickup, with a young man standing on the back. He held a mounted assault rifle in both hands and was firing aimlessly skyward. The whole village erupted into a frenzy, with men and women and children emerging from their huts, confused and frightened. We knew instinctively what was happening, and we were terrified. The Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, Joseph Kony's fugitive band of teenage marauders, had targeted our small village and would rape, maim, and kidnap us into submission. Kony was a monster, allowed to roam free by an indifferent world police establishment and a toothless government in Kampala, seemingly indifferent to our rural farming communities in the north.
Wow, very good.
Yep.
Okay, that's well written. You wrote that. Okay, you also wrote that, right?
Oh, I wrote, this is my book, yes.
Very well written, using emotions and all the senses, sight, sound, smell.
Yeah, it gets
all in there.
Gets pretty interesting as it goes on.
Good.
Yeah.
So again, tell us what you were doing in Uganda.
I was there actually in that particular case on a privately funded project. There was a consortium of 3 organizations. One was the Wildlife Conservation Society in New York. The other was a apparel company called Eden Apparel, which is owned and managed by Bono and Ellie Houston. And as you may know, Bono and his wife have a large commitment to Africa. They raise a lot of money to help the economic development situation in Africa.
For the audience who doesn't know, tell us who Bono is.
Bono is the lead singer in the U2 rock group. He's a pretty well-known guy. And he uses his celebrity to raise money for Uganda. He's a very interesting guy. He's a Canadian. He's Irish, he and his wife. But his wife has this apparel company, and she wanted to source all of the cotton fabric for her apparel in Africa to help the economy there, and specifically in Uganda.
Now, I had read in your biography that you worked with cotton,
Correct.
Selling it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So my consulting business was really based on my background in cotton textiles and apparel. I was the president and CEO of an organization in New York called Cotton Incorporated, which is the organization that promoted cotton fabric. You know, cotton, the fabric of our lives. You see the little cotton logo on shirts and sheets and even on Q-tips. That was my company. I was one of the co-founders and also served as their CEO for a number of years before I stepped down in 1997 and started this international consulting group. So I have a background in cotton textiles and in fashion and apparel. And
did that had something to do with your connection with Bono?
Well, it did, because the consortium of Bono and the Wildlife Conservation Society and a group in San Diego, California called the Invisible Children Group, they're all, kind of NGOs who collaborated together, and they wanted to hire someone to go to Uganda and organize the cotton farmers. The cotton farmers in Uganda are very tiny little farmers. So they only have an acre or two of land. It's all hand production. So they had the spinning facilities down in Kampala, which is the capital of Uganda. They had the spinning facilities down there, and they had the ways of getting the cotton to the spinning mills, but they couldn't get the farmers together so they could aggregate enough cotton to produce these fabrics and yarns. So that's what they wanted me to do, was to organize the farmers into cooperatives. And that's what I was doing over there.
And the government was not against that?
No.
You knew about that?
No, the government, no, they weren't. This was a beneficial thing.
To the country,
Good for the country, good for the farmers. And
international trade.
In it, we also the cotton was of course being spun into yarn in Uganda and made into fabric in Uganda, and the fabric was then being produced into fabric in various other places, but primarily in Asia. But so that's how I happened to get there, and living with those, and I spent a lot of time in northern Uganda, which is a very, very, there's no paved roads. It's a very rural part of that country. And that's where this fellow Coney was active. And I heard an awful lot about him when I was over there, personal experiences that people had and that sort of thing. And so that's what inspired me to write this book.
Great. So I wanted to ask you about now a little bit about how you got into the audio business, because you are a good writer. You majored in English, but to go from that into audio, that's a little bit of acting. You have to have a good voice. How did that happen?
Well,
and it has nothing to do with cotton. It's vinyl.
No, it has nothing to do with cotton. That's another very interesting story. I guess probably like you, Jason, I've had people off and on my whole life tell me I have a pretty good voice, and I've done a lot of public speaking over the years at a lot of different forums, including the World Economic Forum in Davos. I've spoken there. I've spoken in a lot of different places. And people say, oh, you've got a great voice, you should do more with it. And I never paid much attention to that. And it was a few years ago that I was at a meeting where I had made a presentation. And a guy came up to me after the meeting and he said, I really enjoyed your presentation. He said, no, you've really got a good voice. And this was a big guy. He's like 6'3" or 4", and he must have weighed 280 pounds. And he had this deep, resonant, wonderful voice. And I said, so do you? And he said, well, yeah, I make my living with my voice. I said, really, what do you do? He said, I do voiceover commercials and radio commercials, that sort of thing. And I said, boy, that's terrific. How did you get into that? And he said, well, he started to tell me how he got into it. And he said, are you interested in that work? I said, yes, I would be. He said, well, I'll send you an email and I'll tell you exactly how I did it. And, and if you follow the steps, you can probably build a career for yourself. So I didn't think too much of it. I didn't know whether the guy would ever write me or not, but he did. He wrote me a long email with a lot of details, and step one was to go into New York and take voice lessons at a school called Wiesbaden, which is a very well-known actors school and training facility in New York, right off Times Square, actually. And so I did that. I went into New York for almost 6 months, took these courses, and the guy who was teaching the audiobook portion of these courses I was taking was a very well-known narrator. His name is Johnny Heller. And he liked my voice, and he said, you ought to go to the next step. And I said, well, what is the next step? He said, well, the next step is you need to make demos of your voice, a little 2 or 3 minute samples from different books. And he said, I can help you do that. We've got a studio. I've got studio available to me in New York, and I've got an engineer and so forth. So I did that. I made the demos. I set up a website. I put my demos on the website. I joined the association, which is the American Audiobook Publishers Association. I went to some networking mixers, met some publishers. Next thing I know, I got a contract to do a book, and the rest is history.
How did you get a contract to do a book so quickly?
That's a good question. It was late. It was in the fall, and like all books. I was
going to say it's late at night.
No. No, but that could have happened too. It was, so many of the books are sold as Christmas gifts, as you know. Uh-huh. And so this was like in October when I met the guy, and he had a contract to get some books out in time for Christmas from Audible.com, and it was like, I didn't even have to do an audition.
Right, and he would just get it out.
He just get it out, and he sent me the script, and he sent me a contract, and he said, can you do this? Because he asked me if I had my own studio, because he didn't have studio. The guy was actually a California producer. And I said, I do have my own studio. He said, great. And
so it wasn't directly from the author, it was from
a producer.
A producer, okay.
Yeah. Most of that work comes in from a producer.
Not directly from the author.
Not directly from the author. It does sometimes.
If they go to you, do they go to you personally, or do they have to go through your producer if they want you to narrate their book?
If an author wants me to narrate their book?
Right.
I mean, I could narrate their book directly for them.
So you do also private. It's not just through the company.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many books have you done so far?
Right now on Audible.com, which is the audiobook division of Amazon. It operates very much like Amazon. You go to Audible.com, they've got thousands and thousands of titles in audio format on Audible.com, and you can listen to a little 5-minute sample to see if you're going to like the narrator. And right now I have 9 books posted on Audible. I have another one that's going to be going up very shortly within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I have 4 more books in my studio pipeline.
Now, I've seen people, because I've started listening to audiobooks on YouTube, and I've seen people narrate other people's books or even their own books and put it up on YouTube, for instance, but or maybe parts of their book because they want them to buy the rest. What is is Amazon.com selling audiobooks too, or it's just
yes.
They also? Are they selling the Audible.com books, or it's a separate entity?
Audible.com is part of Amazon.
Oh, it is part of Amazon.
Yes, they are a wholly owned subsidiary of Amazon. Mm-hmm. And so when you go to Amazon and you see, my book's not on Audible, but if you saw my book on Amazon, there would be a link there. You could buy it in hardcover, softcover, ebook, or audiobook.
Now, what if an author wanted to narrate his own book? He's in the business anyways.
He could do that.
How would he do that?
Well, he would do it through the Audible. Audible has a production group called ACX, Audiobook Exchange, and that is it's a network online that matches authors or rights holders more often than the authors. Whoever owns the audiobook rights to the book, and narrators. So when a narrator registers on ACX, which I have done some time ago, I can then go in, and they've got thousands of auditions available. And you can use filters. You can say, well, you only want men, you want English, you want Middle American accent. Then you can select the genres. You only want to do nonfiction or fiction. You want to do romance. You want to do mysteries. All of that can be plugged into your search. Then they have different compensation schemes. You can go pure royalty, or you can do no royalty and just a per hour fee that you get paid.
One question. Let's say you have a book that needs a drop of editing into it. Does the reader have to have it perfectly in front of them, or they can do some editing while they're reading? Has that come up to you, that question? Let's say, can the reader also make some changes in the book, or they have to do
the reader himself?
Yes.
No. Once it's recorded, it's
no,
done.
before it's recorded, the person who's reading it, while he's reading it, let's say you skip a sentence?
While I'm reading it as the narrator.
You have to read word for word, or
read
you make
word.
some editing changes?
Read word for word.
Word for word.
Oh yeah. What the author gives you is what you have to read, even though you might not like it or you might not think it's
or it has
good
a mistake
writing
in there. It has like an editing mistake.
If it's got a serious mistake, then you would be expected to correct that.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you're actually doing the actual recording and narrating, the author, or in my case, the narrator, does what they call punch editing, so that when I'm reading along and I know I've made an obvious mistake, or I've coughed by mistake, or I've done something, I can stop the recording, I can cut that out, re-record it, and paste it back in.
Now, I also am making my own educational videos.
Yes.
And I'm also narrating in those videos. And one thing, and a previous lecture I just recently heard from someone who talked about audiobooks, is that a regular person doesn't realize how much noise is out there and the importance of having a sound studio. Just today I was narrating one of my videos, and a plane's coming across. I said, I'll wait for the plane to go across, 15, 20 seconds. And then the neighbor starts mowing the lawn.
Right.
I had to wait a half hour.
Right.
Even closing the doors. You don't realize how much noise you have in your life. And then my stomach started growling.
All of that, the stomach growling, the neighbor's lawnmower, all of that becomes an issue when you have your own studio. Now, when you're working in a professional studio like this is a soundproof room. Right. Home studios are not soundproof. You have to equip them with baffling so that the sound, when you're talking, your voice isn't bouncing off of hard walls. That you can hear. It's like if you talked in a bathroom with all the tile walls, you would hear that tremendous echo in your recording. So you want to have a room that is baffled. You buy these baffling sheets and you put them on the walls of your studio, and you want to have a rug on the floor, and my table where I record like this, I have it covered with a blanket, and so it's very, very soft. You know, the sound is very, very solid and very strong, and I have a very good mic. So that's all part of it.
That's all part of it.
Yeah.
So now we have a couple minutes left. I notice personally, because I'm associated with authors, and I see you out there a lot. I mean, I have to say, somebody, you know, being an author, you do have to market yourself, and you do have to be out there, and it's not, well, I just wrote the book and let the company deal with it and let them sell it. I'm an author. I'm not a marketing person, and no, it's your own business. And I must say, I see you out there a lot, okay? Tell me a little bit about what you're doing, and usually when that happens because a person has a message or a purpose, okay? So tell me a little bit about how you're marketing yourself as an author, you know, and of course this is an author's program, Meet the Authors. So.
Right. Well, you're right. Number one, an author has to market himself. Nobody's going to do it for him, actually. And you've got to, particularly when you're a debut author, you've written your first book and you're an unknown author, and the book could be the best thing that was ever written, but if you're not getting it into the hands of people, it's just not going to happen for you. So what I'm doing a lot of bookstore signing events.
Now, people find it hard to get into bookstores. Are you sending them a letter, calling them up?
What I do is I
know your brother.
No, I personally go to the store.
You walk in.
I walk in with the book in my hand, and I ask for the events manager. Well, in a lot of these small bookstores, the events manager is the owner, you know, and you tell them who you are, and you introduce yourself, and you give them a copy of the book, and you say that you would like to come in and make a presentation and do a book signing, and you know,
you got to do the legwork.
Huh?
You got to do
the legwork, and I've had very good success with this. Yeah.
I noticed that's true. I mean, tell everybody about your Facebook page if you'd like to.
Then of course social media is a big part of it. I have two very good websites. I have a writing website and I have a narrating website. I have 2 pages in Facebook. I have my personal page, which I have a maximum number of followings that Facebook allows you, which is 5,000. So I have 5,000 followings on my personal page.
That's amazing.
Right now I have about 1,000 followers on my fan page. That's unlimited. Hopefully I'll someday have millions.
If you go on his site, want to link up to me, go ahead. One last question, Nick. So there aren't that many private bookstores out there, and especially in Connecticut, but there are some. Are they having a comeback? Because I think now with the author signings and author events, so maybe it's become like entertainment, and it might be having a resurgence. What's your feeling about that?
That's a good point. If
anybody would know, you would.
Most people know, I believe, that the small independent bookstores are having a very, very difficult time, and there's more closing than opening for sure. But stores that are really on top of their game and are aggressive in their marketing, like R.J. Julia in Madison is a very good example. They are a nationally known bookstore, as small as they are in Madison, Connecticut. A top author, I mean a Tom Clancy or a J.K. Rowling, they would not dream of passing up R.J. Julia to do a signing event, and they all come there.
Well, talk about signing. We're at the end of our show. It was a great show. Yep. Sign it over.
Happy to do that. Happy to do that, Jason. And I'm going to use a term here. Bora Matakwa. And unless you're more traveled than I think,
you
probably don't know what that term means.
I do not know, but I know it's African.
Bora Matakwa is Swahili. And it means good luck, best wishes. I'm
not going to forget that.
It's a greeting. No, Bora Matakwa. It's a term I actually heard in East Africa.
Cool. So
Enjoy it.
I'll tell you in Hebrew, Toda Rabbah. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. Thank
Nick
you.
got Under Our Skin. Get his book. It's great.
Great. That was fun.